Raman, the expert, who is going to talk on very important topic on the future of data privacy. It's a very important topic, and there is a demand for this and all over, whether in both government and other corporate sector. And I am very sure this will be very useful to all the faculties and the students. Not only for the students, it's for all the faculties also. I hope it will be of great use to one and all, for the faculties, the students as well as. I hope we will organize such programs in the future. And I am so thankful and grateful to the expert, Mr. Sugi Manivannan Raman, for accepting this our invitation, and you are giving your valuable time to speak with our students. I hope our faculty members from Karunya and students will make use of it to the maximum possible. I thank you one and all again. Welcome you one and all. Thank you.
Maclean, kindly give permission for Suki sir as co-host so that she can share the file.
It has been given.
Sir, Suki sir, you can share your screen. You can even.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Just give me 1 minute. I'm sharing my screen. Yeah.
Before that, announcements to the students. So in the middle of the session, you will have your a quiz that is being conducted from the session that is handled today, and during the end session you will get the feedback form. So you have to fill the feedback form. Those who have filled the feedback form within 1 hour only will get the certificate, e-certificate. Those who registered for big data and Redfit and still have to fill the feedback, fill it before noon, so that you will get your certificate for that particular webinar. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Maclean, your audio, your voice is very feeble. Let me make it very clear. Students and faculty members who are online, okay. At the end of the session, a feedback form will be circulated. That will be considered as your attendance. A few questions will also be asked so as to make yourself, involvement in the entire webinar. So based on your feedback form, that will be considered as your attendance, and based on that, your certificates will be issued. Okay. Suki sir, floor open to you.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you very much for all the staff members and students for inviting me for delivering this webinar. It is a privilege to be speaking to all the young minds of Karunya University and along with the faculty members today. And thank you for providing me an opportunity so that I can feel a little younger connecting to the student community. It's been about 10 years since I stepped out of my college, but recently started associating back with college, in Madras University, and again now with Karunya University. This is a great feeling for me. Thank you very much, students. As we get along, if there are any questions, please raise your hands and ask them. I am not your college staff, so you can freely ask any sort of question that comes to your mind. I'm sure your college staffs would also given you the same freedom at all the time. The agenda for today is a little bit about learning what privacy is and what sort of a future can you expect if you want to shape up your career in the field of privacy. I'm sure people from digital forensics would have been all fancy about SIEM, VAPT, GRC, those kind of related solutions. You would have already fancied about a job opportunity, a prospect there. But also it is important to understand that privacy is also a booming industry in not only in the Indian arena, but also in the global market. So I have put the agenda in a way that it will help you to understand the privacy landscape that exists across the world today, and also, open up your mind towards, looking privacy as a prospective career opportunity in the future when you're ready for a job. So that is what we are going to be dealing in the next, some time today. So as and when you have any questions, don't forget to put it on the chat window or raise your hands and ask these questions to me. Thank you. Right. So let's quickly move on. So I have a packed agenda, but I've made sure that it is very light in nature, not so deep, because this is the first session. I don't want to bore you guys to the core. Obviously, privacy in itself is a very boring, dry subject, so I don't want to add more pain to that. So I've tried to keep it as minimal as possible. So we will spend a few minutes in terms of understanding what privacy means in the introduction to privacy section. And then we will, since most of you guys are familiar with security to a great extent already, now let's also spend a few minutes to understand how privacy is different from security. And we will spend a few minutes again on understanding the ecosystem, who are the players within a privacy landscape, and the principles that governs privacy operations across the globe today. Then we will move on to understand the landscape that exists today from a global perspective, from a European data protection perspective, and also from an Indian perspective. Last but not the least, we will also have a few minutes spent on understanding the tech savvy sector of our student community, who are some of the students that I have been speaking easily get bored when we speak of a process related stuff like a GRC, like an ISO 27001 or a BCMS for that matter. But what excites them is always technology. So we will also speak a little bit on privacy enhancing technologies that exist today. And finally, we will wrap up with a question and answer session. So this is what the agenda is. As I said, any questions, any point in time, put it in the chat box or raise your hands. We will stop there to answer them. We'll see how it proceeds for them, right? I want one condition to be set before we get started. I want this to be not a monologue from my side alone. I want participation from you guys as well. In terms of, this is not a webinar where somebody comes and present to you. Don't treat it that way. I would want you guys to.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Okay, so I would want this to be, I can hear you. Hello.
Okay.
Guys, can you hear me?
Sir, yes, sir. Proceed.
Yeah, somebody was calling me repeatedly, so I wasn't sure whether they were able to hear me or not. If you can check somebody at the back end, so that would help.
Yes, sir. I'll check.
Thank you. So, I would request your participation in the session. If you make it a monologue, then it will be obviously boring. So let's try to make it as interactive as possible. The condition that I want is, please be interactive. Don't be shy. Don't be hesitant to ask questions, because there are no right or wrong questions. Answers can be right or wrong, but questions can never be right or wrong. So have that in mind and ask your questions as and when it comes, right? Let's see, what is privacy, right? So if I have to open the forum by asking this question and ask you guys to put in the chat window your definitions of privacy, what do you think is the definition of privacy? How would you, if somebody asked you to define privacy, how would you define in your own words? Okay, Nikita says rights of individuals. Anybody else? Thank you for being the starter, Nikita. I really appreciate it. Protecting our data from others. Okay. Anybody else? Hidden secrets. Wow. Okay. Self-security. Okay. Fair. Perspective. The state of being free from public attention. Okay. Very interesting. A message from one of your friends. Great. So I think one of the closest one was, the one that was privately sent to me, which says the state of being free from public attention. That is, probably the closest definition I would also agree to. Of course, all the other perspectives is also right, but putting together as a thought process, stitching all the, points together is what, the definition was. Yes, Betsy Morris has raised his hand. If you want to speak, please go ahead, Betsy. Hey, Betsy. Okay, so put in your question in the chat window, maybe if you're unable to speak. I would say, what privacy means is the right to be left alone is what privacy means. Let me be deciding what I want to do, what I want to pursue, what I want to, whatever you want, right? So it's like you creating your own space and then not being disturbed by others in your own space. That is what privacy really means. Now, privacy really encompasses, if you see, privacy is obviously a fundamental right in India because of a recent Supreme Court judgment related to an Aadhaar related case. But putting privacy into context is very, very difficult. And that is what the Supreme Court also said. We can't define privacy. Okay, these are the 10 different elements that we can use to define privacy or something. Privacy is nothing but right to be left alone is what a simple meaning of privacy is. The front runners in the field of privacy, if you look at, obviously European Union was the front runner for multiple reasons that we will see in the coming slides. When we speak of privacy, we can't speak of privacy without a focus on the personal information side, right? Now, what is really personal information? Again, I want you guys to participate in what, according to you, is personal information. Put on your words in the chat window again, maybe. The question is, what, according to you, is personal information? Data or information which solely belongs to the individual. Okay, super. Government identifiers are examples of personal IDs, personal information. Great. Right. So if I want to define personal information, there are ultimately 4 different elements using which I can define personal information. The first and foremost is any information. The definition goes this way: any information that is relating to an identified or an identifiable natural person is what is called as personal information. Now, the 4 different elements is the first element is any information, right? So when we say any information, I can say a subjective information or an objective information. A subjective information may say that, all of you guys are students. It's a subjective information. Let me pick an example. The recent chat window message was from Isaac. So I will take Isaac as an example. Isaac is a student, is a subjective information for me, which is obviously personal to him to some extent. Now, if I say an objective information like Isaac is a good student, right? So it is a subject, it's a subjective information. Like I might agree that Isaac is a good student, but some of his close friends who wants to pull Isaac's leg would not agree that Isaac is a good student, which is a subjective message in that I'm putting in, right? So both objective and subjective information about a person is going to be personal information for that matter. The second is the truthfulness of an information. For somebody to treat some information as a personal information, it need not be true always. Even a false information, which would raise suspicion, should be treated as personal information. Another important thing is the content and the format of the information. Like, can we say that only electronic data which is stored in a computer system or any electronic filing system, is that only personal information, not the paper, for example, the examination papers that you sit and write in your examination hall? Should that be a personal information, right? That should also be treated as a personal information. So personal information are generally subjective as well as subjective in nature. And also it is, agnostic of the form of it. It could be electronic, it could be paper-based, it could be anything else as well. So that is what any information means to. Relating is, an interesting word again. The second parameter that we use. Now, if I say Isaac is a student, that is an information about him, but that is not an information relating to him. The difference between about and relating to is, if I say a fact, straightforward fact, that is going to be an about information. But if I say a fact and I use the fact to do some analysis and infer something out of it, then that becomes a relating to as such. Now I put a fact that Isaac is a student. That means Isaac should be spending most of his time in a day in his college. That means he's not going to be available in his home. Connecting all of these dots, if I want to assume, or if I want to think that where Isaac would be at a given point in time in a day, I can use these information together. Isaac is a student, today is a working day, so Isaac must be probably attending classes today. That is an information related to Isaac, but not directly about Isaac, right? So that is, the relating to aspect of the personal information. The third important is identified or identifiable information. That means either using this information, you can identify an individual already, or with the set of information that you have, you would be able to identify an individual at a later point in time. The future perspective of identity is also taken into consideration when we say something as personal information. The last element is natural person, right? That means, any person, privacy law today across the world, if you look at, they cover information related to living individuals and not deceased or dead people. That is also an important aspect to note from a personal information per se. When somebody asks you what is personal information, this is going to be the most common, basic question if you attend anything related to privacy. If you are very fundamentally strong in your definition towards personal information, I think most of the other things will easily fall in its own place. Four important aspects as we spoke was, first is any information. Second is relating to. It's not about just about an information, but also related information. Third is identifiability of the information. And fourth is a natural living person. So these are the four elements that would define something as personal information. Now let me ask you a tricky question. Is name a personal information? Put in your comments again. Is name a personal information? Okay, a lot of people say yes. When again, remember this, when anybody asks you any data to be personal information or not, there is no straightforward yes or a no to it. It always depends on the context of the data's usage, right? Now, within the closed group of about 50, 60 participants in this call, if I say Isaac, then I would know which Isaac I'm referring to. But if I go to the internet, maybe let's take Facebook, and then I want to find an Isaac in Facebook. The moment I type Isaac, it is going to throw me tens of lakhs of Isaacs there. Now, with that Isaac as a name, can I identify an individual or not? I would not be able to do so. So that means the context is also important. Within a closed set of group, if I will be able to single out a person with the information that I have, then that information should be treated as personal information in that context. The same information in a different context may be or may not be personal information, because it again tags back to the identifiability of a person within the amount of data that we have. Now let's take the example. Now we spoke of Isaac as a name just being personal information or not. Now within the closed forum of this Zoom call, we might say that Isaac is a personal information, but in Facebook, it is not a personal information because the context of usage is different. Now let's say, another example. Now I have Isaac as a name, and I also know Isaac is a student of Karunya University, right? So if I do a combination of both of this, right? If I say Isaac, who is studying in Karunya University, in this group, you would be definitely able to identify. And again, I'm taking the same information to find this Isaac in Facebook. I put Isaac Karunya University in my Facebook search. Then, it is going to be, the search window is going to be coming narrow. Maybe there are only about 10 Isaacs who are studying in Karunya University. So that means in Facebook also, I would be able to single out or reasonably pinpoint to a particular ISEC who is studying in Karunya University and who is studying in the digital forensics department easily. So combination of information can also be treated as personal information. It need not be just one element, but what you have to look into is the combination of multiple elements together. Is it going to lead you to identify an individual versus not, is always should be the question when determining something is personal or not in general, right? So that's the foundation setting for you. What is personal information? Now, should personal information, the controls around personal information, where should it be deployed? If you look at in an information or a data life cycle. So a lot of times what happens is people collect personal information, they put that information to use, they also share this information, they disclose this information to third parties, and then they will, if it is in a computer system or any filing system for that matter, they will have a retention policy towards it, and once the retention is over, they will also dispose of this personal information. Now, should I focus from a personal information perspective, just one of these phases between collection, use to retention, or should personal information be focused in each and every point of time in the data life cycle? The answer to this question is every point of time in the data life cycle, importance has to be given to protect the personal information that is involved within the processing activities as such. So that is typically what we call as a personal data life cycle as such. Every point you will have certain things. For example, when collecting data, I have to ensure that I collect only minimal data from you. Now, when I'm using this data, I will have to ensure that I use it only for a specific purpose that I collected the data for. When I'm sharing this data, I should not be sharing it with anybody who is going to mishandle your data or cause any harm to you by getting access to this data. And then when it comes to disposal, I have to dispose that off in a very secure manner so that, post the disposal, there is not going to be any problem for me as well as for you. So that is how I should treat personal information throughout its life cycle. If you look at any law, the ones that you're going to see today, none of the laws would define personal information or restrict personal information only to a certain elements or certain attributes of data. Like 10 different elements like name, phone number, age, email address, marital status, gender. These are not just defined anywhere saying that, okay, these 10 elements are the personal information and others are not considered as personal information. There is no hard and fast rule like that. The only thumb rule that you have to use is using the information that you have, whether you will be able to identify somebody or not is the fundamental question that you should be asking yourself. In a nutshell, this is what you should know from, what is privacy and what is personal information, right? Let's move on quickly to the next slide. Now, how is privacy different from security, right? Now, you all guys would have studied right from your first years in UG about data security or information security in general. The three pillars of information security are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is nothing means authentication and authorization process in a properly defined way amounts to confidentiality of information. Integrity, completeness, and accuracy of the information. That means the honesty of the information as such is being talked of. Availability is data should be made available to the right people at the right time. So that is what availability is. Now, all of these three pillars satisfied, then you can call a system as a system that is abiding to the security principles to a good extent. Now, what is different from security to privacy is, in privacy, we are not going to be talking of the completeness or the honesty of the data, because as I said, even false information can sometimes be classified as personal information. Maybe purposefully somebody is spreading a rumor about a person, that should also be treated as personal information. Availability is not a question there. Confidentiality is also not a question there. But what is the real question is traceability, right? Now, let's take WhatsApp as the best example for traceability. I send a fake news in WhatsApp and you want to trace me back so that, maybe I'm sending some personal information as a message in WhatsApp, but anonymizing it or, making sure that I'm not revealing my identity using that. Now, if you want to find me using that WhatsApp chain, you would be able to trace back, considerably the amount of technologies that you have today. That is a fundamental element of data privacy. Traceability towards a person who might have circulated that information or who might have been in question of the information as such is called traceability. Linkability is that the probability of you able to link an information towards a particular person, right? As I said, Isaac, Karunya University, digital forensics. Using these three things, I'm linking the available field of information to an Isaac that I wanted to pinpoint to. That is what linkability is. Identifiability is nothing but, again, using these information, would I be able to identify an individual uniquely versus not, is what is identifiability mean. So this is typically the difference between security and privacy. Security deals with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Privacy deals with traceability, linkability, and identifiability. Protection of private information or personal information can never be achieved without security controls in place. That's a takeaway from the slide. Okay, now let's also spend a few minutes in terms of understanding what a privacy ecosystem is. Now, in typical privacy ecosystem, there are three important players. One we call as data subject, the other is called as a data controller, and the third element is a data processor. Who is a data subject? Let's take an example that I am a customer of ICICI Bank and I hold a savings bank account with ICICI, right? In order to open the savings bank account, I would have given a lot of personal information about me to ICICI, right? So in this ecosystem, I will become the data subject. That means the individual that the information relates to is always called as a data subject. The in the same example, ICICI will be the data controller. That means ICICI is the one who determines how the information that I gave will be processed, what purposes they will process the information for, and all of that WH question is answered by ICICI, right? So anybody who determines the ways and means of processing and the purpose of processing is called as a data controller, ideally. The last element is data processor. Now let's take an example using the same, let's continue the same example. Now I want a savings bank account. I have given my information to ICICI. And ICICI, in order, uses an outsourcing company like an Infosys for providing them with their core banking service. If you guys would know what is core banking by now, which is like integrated banking system. I don't have to go always to the home branch to do some transaction. I can do transactions anywhere from any branches of the ICICI network, all of this, right? Now let's take Infosys has got a product called Finacle, which is a core banking solution. Now ICICI is using Finacle, which is an Infosys product as its solution there. Now my data is obviously fed into Finacle, which is a system that is developed by Infosys. And obviously application maintenance support will also be given by Infosys for it. In order to do some bug fixes or any sort of simulation activity, ICICI might share my information with Infosys, so that their maintenance activity is taken care, their production support systems are taken care, and a lot more things. That entity, which is like a typical outsourced service provider, who processes information on behalf of controller. In this case, Infosys processing this information on behalf of ICICI will make Infosys a data processor. That's the third party who processes personal data on behalf of a controller, is called as a data processor. Now, this is what a typical ecosystem, a simplistic ecosystem in privacy looks like. Always three players: subject, controller, and processor. Now, the terminologies could be different in different laws. This is a terminology that is specific to the European laws. In the Indian context, they are changing the terminologies a little bit. A data subject is called as a data principal in the Indian context, and a data controller is being called as a data fiduciary in the Indian context. Data processor is again called as a data processor in the Indian context as well. So this is typically a privacy ecosystem. Now we spoke of what privacy is, what personal information is, and then we also spoke of what's the difference between security and privacy. We also understood what are the players or who are the players in a typical ecosystem. Now we also spoke of all of these things. Now, how would I operationalize privacy? How would I practice privacy on the ground, right? So that is an important part because so far all definitions and theory, fancy theories are done. Now, how would I practice privacy is a typical fundamental question that everybody would have. You guys would probably know today, you go to your house's nearest supermarket, unless otherwise you provide the billing person with your phone number, they would not start the billing. That means, privacy is an important component. It has touch-based all the branches. It is not just a root level problem. It is also a branch level problem today. So it is important how you imbibe the concept of privacy in a day in, day out operation, right? So that is governed by a set of principles. There are many principles across the world available today, but the one fundamental and most commonly used as a benchmark is a set of guidelines and principles given by a body called OECD. OECD stands for Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This is a universal body to which many countries are members to. Now, OECD has given this clear guidelines and principle. Right now, let's first look at the principles, because this, if you understand the principle, then again everything is going to be a little a kind of a cakewalk for you in the future. The first and foremost principle that OECD says from a privacy angle is collection limitation. What it means is collect only bare minimum information that is required while you're collecting something, right? Not, every organization today would say that data is the new oil. Oil has lost all its value already. So data is becoming the new oil. Data is becoming the wealth. Data is an asset, right? At the very same time, when we're defining data as an asset, you should also be thinking the converse of it. Data is an asset as well as a liability. Let's take, if there is a data breach in my environment where I host about 10 million personal records. Now, the 10 million personal records which were there before the data breach was obviously an asset to my organization. The moment the breach happens, the 10 million data records is a liability for me, because I will have to pay penalties, I will have to make remedies, a lot more complexities come in there, right? So that is why the first principle says collect only bare minimum information that is required, not anything beyond and above. Let's go back to the same ICICI example. I walk into an ICICI bank to open a savings bank account, and the banking, the teller in the counter is giving me a account opening form. Now, if I look at the account opening form, ideally for somebody to provide me with a bank account, they might need my name, phone number, address, email address, my age, my PAN card, my social security number. All of this information is going to be good enough for somebody to provide me with a banking account, because obviously they will have to do KYC and everything. Now, I was surprised to see in ICICI's account opening form, they were asking information about my spouse's date of birth. I mean, why on earth somebody would need a person's spouse's date of birth to provide them with a savings bank account? Purely, this is a violation of this principle, in my opinion, if they are collecting. The only reason is because that is no way related to providing me savings bank account. It is obviously a good practice to stop collecting at that point in time. Like, what is the bare minimum? Now, ICICI intention could be like, they want to keep me happy. So they might want to send birthday wishes, not only to me, but also to my spouse, so that, we feel a connection between us and the bank, bank become an extended family member for us. That kind of situation is what ICICI is trying to build. But then, if the data gets lost, my wife will obviously not be happy, and I will also not be happy towards leaking some of that information. That's what collection limitation principle is. Simple, collect what is minimum. Data quality principle talks about collecting the correct and up-to-date information always, which is going to play a key part in your integrity related stuff from a security standpoint. Quality will say collecting the right amount of information is collection limitation. Collecting the right information and an up-to-date set of information is data quality principle. That means the bank should have mechanisms to ensure or validate the information that gets into a system. Having a simple mechanism of an input validation in their website pages where somebody is supposed to enter their name and they're entering a number is going to probably avoid a garbage in, garbage out situation for the banking environment, right? So that is a data quality principle. The third important principle is purpose specification principle. Now, when somebody is collecting information from me, I would expect that somebody to tell me why they are collecting this information. This is common sense, right? So unless otherwise a random guy comes to me and ask, hey, can you give me your phone number? Let's say, suppose, you are walking in your university campus, a random guy comes to you, you don't know who is he and all that. And he asks, hey, give me your phone number. Would you dare to give your phone number to him? No, right? So that is what the essence of a purpose specification principle. Before you gain access to some personal information, you tell the data subject about why you are collecting that information. That's purpose specification. The next is use limitation, which is going to be dealing with, so you set some purpose to the person when you collected the information. Now you have to use the data only for the purpose that you said and nothing beyond and above. Let's take an example. Some random guy walks to you and say, hey, give me your phone number. I am creating a WhatsApp group for our college where we will discuss about canteen related issues or facility related issues or good things about the college, everything. And you are volunteering to give your information. He took your number and you are added to the WhatsApp group. If you've just added to the WhatsApp group and nothing beyond that, that satisfies my use limitation principle, because that person used that information only to put you on the WhatsApp group. Now let's take an example. This guy is a mischievous guy and uses this information on a personal friend. He is giving a random call once in a while to you to check how are you, where are you at the time being, and all that stuff, which is definitely not what he collected the number for. That means he is violating the principle of use limitation there. So that's use limitation. Security safeguards is, as I said, without security, privacy cannot be achieved. So security, which means technical as well as organizational security measures to ensure the right amount of protection is applied to the personal data, is also an important principle. Openness principle is going to be talking about, typically if you go to any website today, you will find at the bottom of the page a hyperlink towards the privacy policy of the website and everything, which says openness typically say that the policies and procedures governing how personal data will be handled in an organization should be made open to the people who are going to be part of your data activities as such. So that is what openness is. Individual participation principle is, rightly as somebody said during the initial part of our discussion, right of an individual to protect their information is nothing but an individual participation. Now let's take an example. If I want to know what information about me does ICICI Bank hold, then I should be able to query ICICI Bank and get a report from them saying, okay, these are the 100 different elements of data that I hold about you. And if I find that out of the 100, 2 elements like my phone number and my address are incorrect in the ICICI database, then I should have the right to go ahead and update my information in their database, right? So that is what individual participation is. If I want to know what data somebody holds about me, I can, write for access. If I want to rectify some of these information, I can have the right to rectification. And if I want to delete the information that somebody is having, then I also have the right to deletion of the data that they hold about me. Accountability is taking ownership of the practices that an organization is doing with privacy. So any organization that is following the 7 principles that we discussed is obviously taking privacy as a serious thing within their ecosystem, and they are going to be accountable for the privacy operations that they are doing within their boundaries. Now, these are the fundamental common sense and 8 principles given by OECD for governing any privacy related operations, right? Now, with this, we will go on to the next interesting section on privacy landscape, right? Now, so far we have been talking on the conceptual part of privacy. Now, let's come to the applicability part of privacy as well. If you look at the globe today, the map that you see on my screen, except for a very little states which are colored in ivory, most of them are either in red or blue. Blue means that they already have a comprehensive data protection law in place, which is governing the privacy of their own country members as such. The ones in red are the countries where a privacy legislation, a law regarding privacy, is in the draft stages or in the vetting process there. I can confidently say 90% of the world today is looking towards having a privacy bill for their own nations. Very conservative countries from a privacy standpoint, like the ones in the Middle East, are also starting to look into data privacy as a serious topic. You can very well see Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, Egypt, and all these Middle Eastern countries are also highlighted in red. That means they are having a legislation that is pending for ratification there. All the major developed markets in the world already has a comprehensive data protection. Europe, Canada, South America, Australia, all of these countries have a regulation already in place. You will be surprised to find why USA is on white or the ivory. That means, such an advanced country, a developed country, but still not having anything related to privacy. Unfortunately, in the US, right to privacy is not a fundamental right according to the Bill of Rights. But in US, sectoral privacy laws exist. You would have definitely heard about HIPAA, which stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. That deals with privacy of the medical patients and anybody to deal with the medical histories and medical records of people there. California, as an individual state, has already come up with a privacy law, which is called as Californian Consumer Privacy Act. Many other states are looking into bringing state-level privacy legislations in the US, but as such, a federal law does not exist in the US at the moment as we speak. But leaving the US market, major markets across the world do have laws that are enacted or in the process of vetting currently in the privacy landscape. That means privacy is a global opportunity for anybody who wants to seize a career in privacy. We will also come to the fun fact of it, in a couple of slides later, or the next slide even, right? So this is what the current global, privacy roadmap is looking like. Let's move on to specifically to European data protection, because when it comes to privacy, Europe is always the front runner. It was for many good reasons and many bad reasons as well, because if you trace back the history, let's take World War II. The fundamental of World War II, if you look at, is basically a war that was fought on ethnicity as the fundamental problem there. Of course, race and ethnicity were the fundamental problem, which rooted for the World War II. Now, ethnicity and race of a person becoming a personal information, if that information was properly protected and not left out for the public, then we could have even avoided a world war like a situation. Now, that is why Europe has always been the front runner in data protection. And they started their journey way back in 1950s. And the most comprehensive law in privacy regime was recently enforced in the European Union, which was a law called GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which became enforceable a couple of years before. 25th of May 2018 is when it became enforceable. GDPR brought in a lot of fundamental changes in the way that organizations across the world were handling personal information for anybody within Europe for that matter. Now, the interesting fact of GDPR is that if you take any law, it will have its own jurisdiction for enforcement. Let's take an Indian IT Act, right? An Indian IT Act can be enforced only within the boundaries of India. Any crime that was made within the boundaries of India, purview to Indian IT Act, will be taken by a court of law or the judicial systems of the country. Now, how GDPR is different is that GDPR did not restrict itself only to the European boundaries. It said, you be a company physically located anywhere in the world, but as long as you process European personal information, you are bound to oblige to the principles and requirements set forth in the data protection regulation of Europe, is what it said. That means I can be a company in India, I can be a company in China, I can be a company in US, as long as I as a company tries to sell products and goods and services to European residents, then GDPR is applicable to me. That's the territorial scope of GDPR, expanding its arms beyond the territorial boundaries of the European Union and embracing all the other countries in its process as well. GDPR had very tough penalties to be spoken of ever in the history. It said, if you are found to be violating some of the principles of GDPR, you can be penalized to a maximum of 4% of your global annual turnover filed for the previous year, or 20 million euros. Whichever is higher could be the penalty for you if you violate any of the principles set forth in GDPR. Now, 4% of global turnover, let's think of a company like Google. Now, if there is a breach in Google or a violation in Google and Google is supposed to pay the penalties, 4% of Google is not going to be the only thing. Google's parent company is Alphabet. Now, what the law will require Google to do is, not just look at the account books of Google, but the account books of the parent company in itself, right? So 4% of a turnover for a company like an Alphabet could runs into thousands and thousands of crores, which is a huge penalty that we're talking about, right? The other important aspects that GDPR brought in is GDPR also put specifics on treating data only after obtaining proper consent from individuals. Like, without the permission of individuals, you should not be processing any of the data. That is one of the ways to process data in GDPR. There are other few ways given, like if somebody is struggling for life in a life-death situation like a COVID, they really don't have to wait to get a permission from somebody to treat them. They can go ahead and process, but majorly consent is suggested as a lawful mechanism for processing information in GDPR. And data breaches, they said, typically for guys interested in SOC and SIM technologies, ultimately how you will have your breach management protocol is that identification, isolation or contamination, containment, then you will have analysis, then you will have, and after analysis, you will have a reporting stage, and then you will have a lesson learned stage. Generally, this is how you will, have your breach management protocols framed. GDPR after coming in, a lot of organizations has to change their approach towards breach management, because the moment you identify breach, GDPR gave only 72 hours of time to report that breach to a governmental agency. That means you can't wait to contain, analyze, and then report. What you will have to do is you will have to ensure that reporting acts as a parallel activity along with your strategies towards containment, analysis, and further due courses of action. So that's also an important change that GDPR brought in. GDPR also made openings for anybody who wants to play a role in privacy through a requirement of data protection officers. So every organization in the world which is subject to GDPR should appoint a team of privacy professionals, ideally headed by an officer called data protection officer. This is an equivalent like a chief information security officer for security. That's how data protection officer for privacy should be looked at. Interestingly, the moment GDPR came in, there was a survey done across the European mainland, understanding how many positions are open from a data protection officer perspective. Initially, you might be surprised that companies reported there are about 28,000 openings for data protection officer roles across the European mainland, but that kept only increasing and not decreasing. The latest survey says there are about 72,000 openings for data protection officers in the EU mainland alone. Now, with India also coming up with a very similar privacy law, you might only wonder how many open positions that might arise because of the Indian privacy bill in India towards data protection officer or data protection analyst to be from a starting point onwards. So it opens up a large Pandora box where people aspiring to become privacy professionals, this is the place, this is the time for you to embrace global laws and Indian laws specifically to take that forward. GDPR also mandated many organizations to perform privacy specific risk assessments. I'm sure you would have done a lot of information security specific risk assessments, be it part of your ISO 27000, be it for part of your BCMS, be it part of your critical device mapping activities in SIEM technologies and all that. This is specifically from a privacy risk standpoint. GDPR is asking organization to perform privacy risk assessments to understand a new project or a new process assets. Is it going to cause any harm for an individual versus not, is something that is supposed to be studied before the start of the operation. And importantly, there is a concept called privacy by design that is put forth by GDPR. It's a very in-depth concept, so I would not be able to do justice if I start talking about it. I will leave it to you all guys as a homework. So go read about privacy by design. There are 7 core principles of privacy by design, which is going to be talking how do you build privacy specific, privacy oriented, privacy compliant products and solutions right from the design stage of your software development lifecycle. So that is in a nutshell about the EU data protection regulation, the most recent one being the GDPR there. Now let's also spend a couple of minutes in terms of, let me see. Okay, so I see that we have got, is there a time limit for this
Sir,
session?
you can proceed. You can proceed, sir. You can
okay,
take
great.
as long as.
Sure, great. Thank you. Just give me a minute. Let me share my screen again. Right. So from Europe, let's come to India, because we all have this affinity towards our homeland, and we want to probably understand, because most of our data is handled in the Indian subcontinent, and how things are going around in India, right? So before I get to India, I see there are a lot of hands raised in the chat boxes. So I will open up for any questions or comments so far from you guys. Please go ahead. Any comments or questions?
Any questions, please type in the chat box.
Okay, thank you, Dharanidharan, for letting me know this is interesting. Thank you.
Hello, Manivannan.
Yes, sir.
I have
You can call me Suki.
Yeah. Manivannan, I have a question. Now, you have mentioned about IT Act and other things. And this IPR, where will you fit into this privacy?
With respect to intellectual properties, you're saying, sir?
Yes. Because our students are studying one paper on IPR, because we have to make it clear what is IPR, and this is almost some overlapping. That's what we have to make it clear to them. That's what I am asking this question.
Is there a specific question that you have regarding to IPR from a privacy standpoint?
IPR, where will it fit into this in your lecture? IPR, is it a tool for privacy, or what?
IPR, obviously whatever is protected from a patent right or a copyright or an intellectual property right, that will act as a tool with respect to the innovation. But what we'll also have to take into cognizance is that who is going to be the owner of the patent, who is going to be the beneficiary from it, and all of that is also some questions that we will have in our mind. Right? Generally, what happens is, if I work for a company, then I file for a patent. Though the patent is going to come in my name, but the patent owner will obviously become the organization that I work for in most of the cases. In those cases, that doesn't become a personal information, but becomes an organizational information. But in certain other cases where it's I openly hold a research-oriented position, I don't have any association with an organization, I get an IPR on my name, then that IP information on my name is also protected from the privacy angle, because IP is also a sensitive personal information according to the privacy regulations. Anything that deals with human knowledge capital is a sensitive personal information according to the privacy regulation that would get covered there. But again, as I emphasized, important point to see is, ponder upon is, who owns the IP? Is it just patented on somebody's name, but the ownership of the IP is with an organization, or the ownership of the IP is also with an individual, is a fundamental question that we have to ponder upon, sir.
But privacy comes, privacy. Privacy is there,
Yes, sir. Privacy is obviously guaranteed. The only catch again is
that is the core of the act, IPR. It is my own. Correct. It is my own. Somebody should come within my space. That is the base of privacy told in the beginning.
There are a couple of points to note here, sir. One is, IP is my own, as long as it is from an individual centric, we are pushing that. The moment, if an IP is supposed to be owned by an organization, then it doesn't become my own, but it becomes my organization's own. That's one important point that we'll have to think through. The second important point, which is a conflict between privacy laws and the IP laws today, is that IP laws are protecting, even after the inventor is dead. The IP is still going to be tagging to that person's name alone. But privacy law, there is a little bit of a conflict in that area, which we will have to wait and watch for clarity. Privacy law says, an information is treated private only until the person is living. The moment he is dead or deceased, that information belonging to that person is no longer going to be treated as personal information. That is not in line with the IP Act in certain provisions, because IP Act tags along even after the death of the person, sir, in my opinion. So that's one fundamental difference that I see, which is a conflict. I'm sure this will get resolved by further judgments that we will receive in this area so sooner or later, sir.
Okay, thank you, Manivannan.
Thank you, sir. Ratika has put on a question. So if we are using a third-party personal data processor, does that mean they are fully responsible for our data? Very good question, Radhika. I really appreciate it. How would you mean, if you would have definitely studied about this, what is binding between a processor or any subcontractor or outsourcer and the controller is going to be the contractual obligations, right? So that is what is going to be binding both the parties together. Now, if you want to make somebody fully responsible for our data, and as long as you have binded that to the contractual language, very clearly saying these are the contractual obligation that you have to factor in while you're delivering this activity for me, then you can make him fully responsible. By default, GDPR would not say that the processor is fully responsible for our data. Obviously, laws that exist today say that processor is responsible for certain activities, to the likes of, say, if I outsource this further, I as a processor decides that I want to outsource a piece of your work to somebody else, then I should not be doing that without letting you know about it. Now, that is one of the obligations that privacy law put on a processor directly, and they are directly responsible for it. But what do you mean by fully responsible is that the word fully should be defined properly in your contractual language. Then you can make him fully responsible. Otherwise, it's going to be still a loosely coupled, point to ponder upon, Pratika. I hope that that answers your question there. Any other questions, guys? And appreciate your question, Radhika. Thank you. Very, very interesting, very important question that you asked. Great. Let's proceed on to understand the Indian view of privacy. The fundamental step in privacy, privacy is not a holistic program, a holistic law that, protecting private information in India does not exist even as we speak today. But the flavors of protection of personal information were there in the IT Act of 2000 itself. There were specifically section 43 of the IT Act spoke of personal information, protection of it, and then penalties for violations and stuffs like that. The act was amended in 2008. Most of you guys would know. The recent amendment was 2008, and then there was one more amendment proposed in 2013, very, very minimal sections there. Right from 2010 onwards is when the Indian diaspora started to speak about privacy to a great extent. The fundamental problem for all of this was the government's decision to implement Aadhaar in 2010. So Aadhaar started somewhere in 2009-10 time and went way beyond in terms of many things like collection of biometric information like fingerprints, iris scans, and a lot of more things were collected. Obviously, the purpose that the government said was we are collecting Aadhaar, we are giving Aadhaar for streamlining the public distribution system in India. But for public distribution systems, why do you need to collect biometric information and stuffs like that was the fundamental argument put forth by a lot of privacy advocates there, right? So 2010 onwards is when there were a lot of traction in the Indian arena towards privacy and protection of personal information. And back then the UPA government, UPA 2 government in 2011 brought the first privacy bill in India, which was Right to Privacy Bill 2011, which unfortunately was only a draft, never got tabled in the parliament, nothing happened. So this was the first step towards the privacy law in India. And 2013, the data bill was proposed again by the same UPA 2 government. Again, that didn't take any shape. It was again a draft law that existed. 2017 is when finally something started to come up with the Supreme Court clearly giving judgments, clearly giving indications to the central government saying that you need to have a legal backing towards your target, which was another thing associated to Aadhaar. Target Act was, you could read about Target Act when you have time. So the Supreme Court clearly said, if you want to possess Aadhaar, if you want to proceed with that, you want to safeguard it, you will have to ensure protection is towards the personal information collected by the Aadhaar scheme is obviously done through a legal backing to it. And that's when the NDA government started to take, NDA 1 government started to take the data privacy seriously, and they reintroduced the data bill with a lot of revisions and amendments to it. Again, that was just the draft bill. It didn't take any shape. But something promising happened. The NDA 2 took that again seriously. Sorry, NDA 1 took that again seriously. And then in 2017-18, there was a justice by name Sri Krishna. There is a justice by name Sri Krishna still. He was assigned a role to come up with a white paper on data protection framework for India. And later that same white paper was converted into a draft bill called the Personal Data Protection Bill 2018. And he submitted his report to the IT Minister, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, in 2018. And, there ended the story because the NDA 1 government's period was over. So the report was submitted to the government, but nothing happened after that. Now, after NDA 2 government formed last year, 2019, again, this was taken up seriously. The recommendations given by Justice Sri Krishna through his white paper and the draft bill were reconsidered, and the IT ministry came up with its own version of a new data protection bill in 2018. Last year in December, the same bill was tabled in the parliament, introduced and tabled in the parliament by Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, who was the IT minister for India. And immediately the bill had a lot of backslash because one side, it was talking about very good intentions of protecting personal information. On the other side, it also spoke of government having an ultimate say and government having ultimate authority over personal information. So the government departments were exempted from the law. Government departments can do anything with the personal information of Indian residents is how the draft bill was proposed, finally, when it got tabled. So immediately there was a lot of backslash from the opposition party, and then it was referred to a joint parliamentary committee for their review and final submission. The Joint Parliamentary Committee was supposed to submit their report in the last session, but unfortunately due to COVID, the last session got abruptly ended. So we will have to wait and watch until the next session of the Parliament starts to see where is it going to take, when is it going to take shape. So this is the landscape of privacy in India. So obviously sometime in 2020, we will have a privacy law in India. If you want to take privacy as a serious career opportunity, I think you are the best time from 2020 onwards in the Indian landscape in itself. So that is what the Indian view of the bill looks like at the moment. Now, looking at the draft bill of India, there are certain key elements that the Indian bill is trying to put in. Obviously, you can self-read it since you will also have the material soon. But I will pick a couple of important points at least. One is the Indian bill proposes data localization in India. That means any organization dealing with sensitive personal information like financial data, information about racial and ethnic origin of people, information about caste, information about political views and religious views and all that. For all of that information, something called as sensitive personal information in the Indian bill, they say that a local copy of that data should always reside within the Indian boundaries. And there is one more segment of data called as critical personal data, for which data can never be stored outside of India. The data has to be always there within the Indian boundaries in itself. That is one of the most crucial points that is being discussed and debated in the Indian circle very hugely, because it is going to hamper the way that data governance and data strategies of multinationals and organizations across the world is today. Because if you want to go for most of the organizations today are cloud-based organizations. Now in a cloud, generally I don't say that I want to host my data within the Mumbai data center or the Delhi data center. I would leave it to Amazons and the Googles and the Microsofts to decide where they want to put my data. Of course, I have the option to pay a premium price and still say that this is where my data should be. But most organizations prefer not to do that and have the data anywhere hosted by any of these cloud providers. So this is going to be one implication for them from a data strategization standpoint. We will have to wait and watch what's going to happen there in the Indian ecosystem as such. All the other points, if you look at, more or less very equivalent to GDPR. In some cases, it is even more stringent than GDPR, but comparable to GDPR to a great extent. There is a question from Mr. Error. Okay, nice name, Mr. Error. Ensuring privacy. Privacy is important, right? Then why companies like Google, Facebook, and other companies collect the data from the users and what the purposes are? Great question, Mr. Error. I would only say, did any one of you got the chance, probably in the last 2 years, there were a couple of Congress hearings, Senate hearing of the Facebook founder, Mr. Mark Zuckerberg, and the Google CEO, Mr. Sundar Pichai. They were invited to the American Congress, American Senate, and they were questioned by the Senate members of the American Parliament. If you had an opportunity to view them, you might know the answer already. But if not, I would say there are YouTube videos available. Go watch them. What you will find is that both the companies, which are huge collectors of data, say that they do treat privacy as a default option. Right. So there was a question, interestingly, one of the senators asked Sundar Pichai that if I put my phone in my pocket, which has got locations enabled, and walk from one end of the room to the other end of the room, do Google know that I walked from one end of the room to the other end of the room? Which is about location tracking. The question is obviously, for which Mr. Sundar Pichai, politely, in a very subtle way, in a composed way, responded saying that by default, we do not. But if you want us to do, then we do. That means all of these organizations also take, I'm not advocating any of them, but they say that, they treat privacy as a component. Now, when you install your Android phone, you had the permissions with you, whether to grant Google the permissions to use your location data versus not. Similarly, many other data as well. Now, if you wanted to avoid that service because you think that is important to you, that you think that it eases out your day in, day out operation, then that's a call that you have taken. Now, all of these companies are, in a strategical way addressing your questions. They are saying that, somewhere in the fine print of my terms and conditions, I have made it clear to my users saying that these are the data that I will collect. These are the purposes for which I'm collecting. Now, how many times do we read the terms and conditions before we sign up for something? That's something that we have to ponder upon. Of course, there are bad ethical practices with any organizations dealing with data, but to a large extent, I would also put the blame on the user's awareness perspective, because we do not take right precautions before we start our data, share our data. I'll also give you one example because we are almost towards the end of the presentation. One more example. Most of our phones are today enabled with Truecallers, right? Truecaller is an application which is more like an aggregator. It collects all the contact details from my phone's contact pages, and then it will, have a database of who is who. And if a guy who is not there in my contact database calls me, I will still get an update saying that, or a pop-up saying that this is the person who is calling you, though it is coming from a number for me, right? So Truecaller, most of the people, I have not installed Truecaller in my phone because I don't want to expose my contact data to somebody else sitting somewhere else in the world. I have not done it, but let's say I have given my data to a friend of mine who is a big fan of Truecaller, and he has got Truecaller installed in it. Now, without even my consideration, my information is shared with Truecaller. Now, can we all say that it is Truecaller at fault and not any one of us? I wouldn't say yes to it, because if you look at Truecaller's fine print of privacy policy, they clearly say that or put the onus on the, if I am using Truecaller today, Truecaller is putting the onus of getting the consent from my contact databases on me. That means Truecaller says, hey, look, we assume that you have taken consent from your friend for having their data uploaded to Truecaller through you. And most of the times we don't know, we have not read the privacy policy of Truecaller, and that's why we have been doing. We are assuming things for granted today. And if we know that this is what the practice that Truecaller is doing, then we would have not done certain things in certain ways that that is impacting our lives today. That's my take on your question, Mr. Error. Next, we have something from Sam Daniel. Do we have the process and resources in place to support data access requests from individuals? When we say do we have, data access requests should ideally go to an organization. An organization is expected to have these resources and processes in place to handle them. If they don't, then in principle, they are violating the privacy regulation. They will be penalized today or sometime in later about it. So any organization which is bound by a privacy regulation, which gives users the right to access information, should have a team which is adequately skilled to handle that kind of information request from individuals. Yes, that's a requirement by the law. Excuse me. So last part of the slide I have is the last, which is going to kind of influence or excite the tech savvy guys in you. We are going to be dealing about privacy enhancing technologies. There are a lot more technologies, but I'm giving you hints of of course you would have seen that privacy is a lot more process oriented so far, but the process will be incomplete without also technology playing in a key part. Now there are ample amount of privacy enhancing technologies. I will start one with encryption. Encryption is definitely a privacy enhancing technology. Along with pseudo-anonymization techniques, encryption is also a key player. So if you are a fanboy of encryption algorithms and you plan to write your own encryption algorithm, probably a homomorphic one, yeah, this is the time that you should start even from a privacy angle looking into it. Important, another one is digital rights management. Privacy, as we spoke, is also encompassing a lot of security controls there. So obviously it becomes imperative who has got any sort of rights about a personal information that belongs to a person. So how would you manage it? Obviously, two important things that you have to take into consideration. One is metadata rights management as such as a solution, and also digital rights management as another solution, or IRM related solutions like the ones that Microsoft gives and Google's give, and all of that could also be a very good privacy enhancing technology. The next one is UX UI designer, the user experience and user interface designers. They play a major role because a lot of the things that we are dealing today, right? Say, for example, if somebody wants to gain access to their information and they want to exercise their right to access. Now, if I don't give that option through at the front end, maybe I'm a website company or a web-based application, and if I can bring in that flavor of rights management, data subject rights management using my front end itself, that would obviously bring in a lot of transparency and trust about me. At the same time, I have a technology support that can streamline my rights handling processes. So obviously UX and UI designers play a huge role. System development lifecycle. So as we spoke, the privacy by design is a component that is going to address system development lifecycle because the regulations that are coming up today wants privacy not to be seen as a separate item, but it should also be seen as a functional requirement within your development life cycles. So for example, you are developing something in an agile model today. Agile has sprints and user stories within it. Each of the user stories, there should be somebody representing the user story from a privacy angle within it as well. So SDLC is also an important area that will play privacy, that will have a huge play in privacy enhancing in the future. The last couple of things is application programming. So obviously that is related to your SDLCs. So obviously there you will have a lot of play. The last important thing is identity and access management because privacy is all about identifiability of an individual. Now, how would you manage this identity is the core problem from a privacy angle. You have enough solutions today like PIM, PAM, you have MDM solutions, you have user behavior analysis solutions, you have SIEM, you have DLP. All of them are privacy enhancing technologies per se. So these are, some of the interesting things that you can take it forward from a technology standpoint as well. Now, with that, I think I am at the end of my session. Obviously, I will take the questions that's coming in my chat window. And you can find, these are my contact details. If there are anybody interested in knowing more about privacy, you can definitely contact me at these given coordinates here. Now, let me take the questions. Yeah, Nikita, what you said about Truecaller then can be said for such app. Does that mean we don't download app in our for they won't work without allowance of access to the following like contacts and camera? Very valid question, Nikita. So today, if you go to the Play Store and download any application, you still will have a lot of applications today have moved from, mandatorily asking for permissions. They have the options. So for example, I think Google did it by default a couple of iterations back in their Android operating system itself, where you can granularly give permission. I don't, have to generically say that I agree the application to have access to microphone, to camera, to sensors and everything. So individually, granularly now apps are asking for permission. Like you will get a separate pop-up for mic, you will get a separate pop-up for camera, you will get a separate pop-up for sensors, you will get a separate pop-up for contact and everything. So you can pick and choose which one do you want. Now, for you to understand whether an application or an app is really good versus not, what you will have to really think is use common sense. Now you find an application like, you're downloading an image editing application. When installing this image editing application is asking permissions to your gyroscope in your phone. That means something is really suspicious with this application. The purpose is simple image editing. And why would that application need gyroscope access? You apply common sense and then choose whether to install those applications versus not. It's a call that you will take. Risk versus reward, right? Second question, Mr. Error again. Yes, sir, we always accept that, but in the congressman asks why Facebook create shadow profile for non-users. Then how we are prevent from like the shadow profile, WhatsApp chat tracking, Instagram post location sharing. Great point, Mr. Error. Again, I would reckon you go ahead and read Facebook's privacy policy. The information about shadow profiles are also given explicitly in the privacy policy of Facebook. If there is somebody to be blamed, of course, Facebook should also be blamed for it, but also the users and the non-users of Facebook should also be blamed for it, because Facebook clearly say that even if you are not a user of Facebook, your information might still landed with me. For example, I'll take, if I'm a subscriber of Vodafone, I don't use Facebook, hypothetically. Now, if Vodafone wants to do a targeted advertisement using Facebook as a platform, then what Vodafone will do is Vodafone will extract a dump of personal information from their customer relationship database and share it with Facebook. Now, Facebook will use the concept of the linkability, traceability, and identifiability, which is privacy ideally. So what they will do is, using the combination of information that Vodafone shared with them, they will try to find whether this user is there in Facebook or not. And if the user is there, then they will start showing more Vodafone ads on the Facebook wall of this particular person. That's how Facebook advertisements really work. Now, if I am a customer of Vodafone, but I don't have a Facebook profile, there are ample amount of possibilities that Vodafone is going to share my data with Facebook, and that data will be there with Facebook. And Facebook might put that data in use when I go and create a new account in Facebook for me, or in the event of course of time, they will drop the data because according to their data retention policies as such. This is a very clear indication of this given in Facebook's privacy policy. But unfortunately, there is no reason for a non-user of Facebook to go and read Facebook's privacy policy, because I would think as a non-user, I'm not using Facebook. Why should I go and read Facebook's privacy policy? That's how it really works. But yeah, I see there is a point that you're making. Facebook is also, questionable in this practice for its ethical practices, as well as the other organizations which are sharing data with Facebook are also equally questionable, and also the users of Facebook are also equally questionable, in my opinion, Mr. Error there. Isaac, again, so what do you think about relationship between comfort and privacy? Interesting question. So obviously, your point, you're hitting the nail rightly, Isaac, I would say. Everything comes with a risk versus reward. And if you think the reward is more than the risk for you personally, then go ahead and take the reward. Simple, right? So for example, Swiggy last year, Swiggy, the food delivery platform last year did a wonderful marketing campaign saying that leave your date of birth to us and be assured your birthday lunch is on us, is what the advertisement said. They are trading my date of birth in return for a meal on my birthday. And if I think that meal is more important than my date of birth, then I will obviously go and opt for it. I'm not saying this is right versus wrong. This is a call that users will have to take. Now, having locations enabled is also a similar question. I am in a new place. I don't know anything about the place. Instead of risking in a new place, new language, so I don't know the language as well. Instead of risking myself ending at a wrong place, I use Google locations there. There is a reward for me more than the risk that I foresee. That's how I evaluate on a case-by-case basis, Isaac here. Havok Arvind, Zoom app is not privacy. For some countries, they banned Zoom application, and then why we are using this application? Your opinion about privacy in Zoom. So many of the students are having this question. It's a controversial area, Havok. I don't want to get into it, but I would say, there are propaganda, there are real news as well. You will have to think, you will have to take a side to believe, is this a propaganda or is it a reality? Have you done a proper analysis of the vulnerabilities that exist in Zoom? Initial bashing of Zoom happened just because of the reason that there was a Chinese company. Without even somebody thinking whether are there vulnerabilities, are there fixes available, what was the take and all that. So I wouldn't say that illogical bashing should be appreciated at any point in time. But if you feel that Zoom has potential vulnerabilities, which is putting everybody's privacy at risk, then I would only appreciate Zoom should be running a bug bounty. Go and report your bugs using the bug bounty and get some rewards as well. I would probably say any application for that matter will not have 100% security. 100% security as well as 100% privacy can never be guaranteed in the information security and privacy world. Have that in your mind. So you can think of alternatives like Zoom, Teams. You can think of alternatives like, there is a new platform called Team Link. Many alternatives are there, but it is a cost benefit analysis. It is a user experience analysis that you do before choosing a particular application as such. Why the companies want data? I mean, I think the company want data because they want to provide services to us is the fundamental reason. But at the same time, the companies wants more and more data because data is a wealth today. Does the Vodafone gives the data to Facebook or sell it? Vodafone does not sell the data, in my opinion. I'm not qualified to answer, but I honestly, as a consumer, feel that Vodafone is not selling data, but giving data to Facebook to ensure that their marketing campaigns are run in a proper way. I don't think they sell, but there is no guarantee for that statement as well. Is there any certification for this course? Yes, definitely privacy certifications are coming up. There is a couple of organizations that I can speak of. One is the Data Security Council of India. So they have privacy related courses. And also there is an association internationally called as International Association of Privacy Professionals. They also run a lot of certification courses in privacy. And if you want to have some good to go, lockdown related certifications, I would say University of Derby is giving, certified data protection officer as a course, which is a good to go certification in my opinion. You can enroll for yourself. Students, please attend the quiz. Okay, fine. There is an image. I don't want to open that though. From Isaac again, online, if you want to ensure anonymity, and we use guest accounts, they still know our identity due to overreaching hands of the companies of ABC and cookies. Is foolproof security? Absolutely, Isaac. Foolproof security, privacy is a myth. There is no foolproof mechanism. If you think that you have the best of the technologies in the world, you can only think so unless some new technology comes in. So definitely it is a myth in my opinion. But what is important is that you take measures from you as an individual, as well as your organization should take the right steps to ensure that they are taking it seriously. That's important. Quiz time, please go ahead and do. Navanita Krishnan, recorded by Zoom. I'm not sure what kind of meeting you did in Zoom, but put that worry aside. I don't think they will do a recording, but if you ask, would there be a feature? Would they have the ability? They might have the ability, in my opinion. It doesn't state that they give the data to someone else. Which privacy statement I would want to get in? Aaron, maybe we can connect sometime later. You have my coordinates. We can, take this question offline and see how we can, how I can help you in that. I think with that, I will close the session. You have been a wonderful set of participants, lot of interaction. I didn't expect this much interactions, from a student group. So many good questions. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity given to me. Thank you to Karunya University, the faculty members and the students who lended your ears for the past 1.5 hours for me. Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity. With that, I'll hand it over back to Ms. Tilagraj or any staff member of Karunya University. Thank you.
Manivannan, thank you so much for your wonderful lecture. Well prepared, systematically you have presented